Alright, so we're live. So today we're doing a pretty basic video. I'm answering this guy's question, which he just asked, how do I assign a material and how do I animate the transparency? He wants the object to fade in. This is actually really basic, but that's not an insult. It's still a really important skill, and it's not super obvious. Certainly it wasn't obvious to me when I was first beginning. So I'm just going to help this guy out with a Blender 2.79. That being said, I did create a animation for you guys so you could see. Now, this is a little bit stroby, so if you are very epileptic, maybe stop watching. Anyways, so what happens is I've done, basically, I've animated the transparency, but also the color. So you'll see the color from here it's a keyframe where it's set to white, or whitish, then it goes to red, then back to white again, but this whole time it's fading into a blue transparency. So if I just pull it full speed, it's a little bit trippy. I probably shouldn't have done the color animation as well. I could have animated the rotation, the position, the size, the scale, all that stuff could have been animated. I could have animated a blend key or blend shape, whatever it's called. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, however. So now I've already kind of opened a bunch of windows, which I expect that if you're a newer user, this would be complicated for you. So I'm going to go ahead and close them. So I'm just going to left click and drag, close, left click and drag at the top right to close this one. And this is roughly what you'd see at the beginning. Now I'm even going to remove the material, and in fact we'll just start with a new cube. So this is basically right from you'd have at the start. No material assigned. We're in cycles render, by the way, which is important. I know that I have a different default theme and color than the other blenders. That shouldn't affect the rest of this process. So let's go ahead and start from scratch. And again, this is a different layer, so we are doing this from scratch. So the most basic thing to do to simply animate a material. It's actually not that hard. We just go ahead and add a new material with the object selected in object mode. I'm also going to enable screencast keys, so you can now see what I'm doing. And so let's go ahead and set this to node editor. This window is going to be our node editor. And it's important that we have the material and the object selected. This won't work if you're in the compositor, and it won't work if you're in the world editor. And by the way, if you want to watch my video on HDRIs, I explained to you how I set up this. Actually, let's go ahead and see it. I have an HDRI set up right now, and if I go ahead and rotate it, you can see that it actually rotates, right? Pretty cool. So that's a separate video, which I have up for you guys. So once you have the object selected and the material selected, and you have the material set up, which I don't, so now we do. Now, this is a node setup for a simple diffuse shader. Now, I think principled shader looks nicer, so we're going to go ahead and down to principled BSDF, although you could animate this for anything. Now, what we have to do to animate the transparency is pretty simple. Go ahead and just put in a transparent. I hit Shift-A to add a new node, and I hit translucent by mistake. We just type in transparent. There's our transparent BSDF, sorry. And let's put in a mix shader. Oopsies, mix. We're having some trouble here, guys. All right, so let's go ahead and put in a mix shader. So you just left click and drag, and now we'll put this into the input of this shader. And to see what's actually happening, if I don't change anything, let's go ahead and make this blue. And again, if I wanted to, one thing I did change from default, I have enabled denoising, which makes your render look nicer generally. We could disable it, which is the default. And also, let's go ahead and stop viewing the background right there. All right, anyways, so back to the material. This is the default. So we see it's kind of transparent. It's 50-50. So if I do it max, it's totally transparent. Now you can see it's at 0.945. It's barely visible. And then this is fully just the white diffuse material. Now I could make this metallic if I wanted to. I could make it also rough as well. And I could animate any of these. Any of these values can be animated. And all you have to do is basically hit I. We also have to have the timeline open for this to really make sense. We're going to left click and drag at the top right and open the timeline. And this is really important. And we're also, I recommend that you get a little bit familiar with the graph editor as well, because you probably want to change your interpolation, which I expect you have no idea what that means. Don't worry, I will explain it later in a second. But the most basic, just to simply have, as this guy requested, I show you how to assign material. Now let's say you already had an object created. If you already had an object created, and you had the material created, you could also just click this tab, and you could select the material, and then that material, if you did this, if you tapped in edit mode and you said assign, it would definitely be assigned. And what we could also do is you could select this face, and we could make this material, add the second material back in, and then assign it right here. And to actually view it in the viewport, what we could do is have this be black, and have this be, or maybe it's a little too extreme. Maybe have this be blue and this be red. And that way you can actually see which material is which in the viewport. And if I go ahead and hit Shift Z, you can see that, in fact, they're having a very similar effect right now because they're very similar materials. If I make this bright red, you can see how it's different. So that's, how you can assign different materials to the same object, which is important. So I'll just show you how I made exactly this first animation that I made. The first thing is just to animate to, actually I'll do it the reverse. I'll do exactly what he asked for. We'll have it fade in. So we're going to have it, I'm going to delete this other material we don't need. We're going to start off fully transparent, and we're going to fade in like this. So we do is, once you're on fully transparent, on your first frame, frame 0, we hit I. That's simple. A keyframe is set. And then if I go to frame 50, and we could change this to frame 100 if we wanted to. Let's just do frame 60 for 60 FPS. And we could go ahead and go 60, frame 60, and hit I with after we change our factor down to 50, like 25%. And then if we hit I again, we redo the keyframe. And now it fades in, right? That simple, right guys? Now we could animate the position as well. So if I go ahead and hit tab, sorry, my neck's hurting me a little bit. I could go ahead and hit I on frame 0 to save the position, and I hit I again for rotation and scale. Now I could go to frame 10, and I could rotate it, like let's say, actually let's go to frame 25 or frame 30. I could rotate it like, let's say 30 degrees, and hit I on the rotation. I could scale it up, like scale twice, and hit I. I could move it up like 4 or something, and then if I go ahead and like watch this, it goes, you see how it kind of, I didn't, like I said, I didn't set the keyframes right there. Now what you could do is you could actually copy and paste the keyframes. So if I go ahead and the graph editor, I believe I can copy and paste them, or maybe it's the, it's actually the dope sheet that I would need to do to copy and paste that, which is kind of advanced. And I probably don't need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways, just to show you how you kind of have, it would return to its initial position, even though I screwed up and I didn't save the positions. So what you would do is in the dope sheet editor, you would select, let me see if I can actually do this. I'm going to need more room actually. So I'm hitting A to deselect everything, and I'm hitting box selection. And actually I'm going to have to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the dope sheet right here so I can actually see it. I'm deselecting everything, and I'm going to hit Control B. And actually what I don't want to do is I don't want to select the material right here. So we're going to not select, or select all the keyframes except for the material keyframes. So I hit Control C over here at frame 60 and Control V. And now it'll return to its initial position on the timeline. You see how it works? So now it's returning back to its initial position, except I put these at frame 61 and not 60. So if I want to probably undo that, put them right at frame 60. So now it returns to its initial position. Pretty cool, right guys? So that's pretty basic, and I actually like the interpolation, but you see how it slows down? If I play this in animation, you should notice how it slows down. It starts up slowly, and it accelerates and it decelerates the speed of the animation. So it starts from a speed 0, and it speeds up to a 10, and then it goes back to 0 slowly. Like, this is not a consistent speed, right? It's at like a, you can see it right there happening. So to undo that, you might want that. But if you're doing an actual character animation, you almost certainly don't want that. So what you would want to do is have the graph editor, and you can barely see it happening. What I should probably do is kind of do this type of thing so you can kind of see it. I'm going to limit this to 60 frames and kind of change my zoom in to like, let's see. You can barely see it. What I'm going to do, you can see how this is kind of curvy, this interpolation. If I select all of them and I do, I think it's channel, or is it marker? It's actually key. Interpolation type, and I do linear, then you see that this is not curved anymore, and it'll stop being, the acceleration that it was there before is no longer there. It's a completely static speed. There's a much more static, or there's much more of a pop to the change in direction and speed, which you might not want. For something that's simple, having the interpolation be curvature or a curve actually looks better. But for if you're trying to get an exact control with a walk cycle, I find that the interpolation is very obnoxious. So just keep that in mind. But we're going to go ahead and close the graph editor because that's not really important. And in fact, I probably shouldn't have done something as complicated as the graph editor and the dope sheet for somebody who had a simple question. But I did it anyways because, I don't know, I wanted to help other people watch this as well. So this is not, obviously this is not great looking. but you can see how, I guess the material itself, yeah, it fades in as hoped. So to actually render this is actually not that complicated. I'm gonna go ahead and pause this so it stops bothering me. What you want to do is, when you go under your render tab of the properties menu, go down to your output and export it into the file you want to export it to. And you go ahead and then you would hit render animation. Now you should go ahead and adjust your resolution. If you're going to do a small animation, it doesn't have to be a full screen. Then don't do a full screen. Like, if I had a perfectly square animation I wanted to do, why would I render it at a 16:9 ratio? Well, I guess I wanted to fit on YouTube. That might make sense. But if it's just for my own purposes, I don't necessarily have to do that. So go ahead and play around with your resolution and the frames per second. So if I'm doing 60 frames per second, that will affect how fast this plays actually. You see that's actually faster now? That actually is a factor there. And now just because you render it at 60 frames per second, I could render this, have this set here at 60 FPS, and I could, in my video editing software, I could put each frame to be 1/24th of a second, meaning that even though in Blender it was 1/60th of a second each frame, that doesn't mean that I couldn't take each individual frame that's rendered and put them to 24 frames per second. This really affects how you view the animation. It doesn't affect how, if you take each individual frame and you render it as an MP4 in, let's say, Sony Vegas, as I did for this animation. If I can pull it up, right, no, I already closed it out. But what I had each individual, frame is like, in there. And so I just put each one of these frames in a video editing software as 1/24th of a second. So however much that comes out to be as a decimal, that's how long it was. So not terribly complicated. We pretty much all done here. And again, you just set your output there, and you might want to play around with your sampling. I only did 50 samples. You probably want to do more than that. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm sure there's a lot more to animation than this that you could learn about. There are some really good, fantastic videos about Blender walk cycles, so I would encourage you guys to look those up. I think Sebastian Leg, if I pronounced his name wrong, I'm sure. He has a good video that I appreciated, which I used to actually make my own walk cycle. Alright guys, well thank you for watching, and I wish you luck with this process.